they're really important stories to tell.
Live from London, this is BBC News. President Trump reissues a travel ban, this time imposing full restrictions on 12 countries, including Afghanistan. The Democrats say it's designed to distract attention from a deeply unpopular spending bill.
Very simply, we cannot have open migration from any country where we cannot safely and reliably vet and screen those who seek to enter the United States.
The aid organisation that controversially replaced UN operations in Gaza has resumed distribution at 2 of its centres that have been closed in the past 24 hours. Israel says it has recovered the bodies of 2 of its citizens killed during the Hamas October 7th attack.
I'm Sumi Somaskanda, live in Washington, where the German chancellor is here for his first visit since taking office. Trade, tariffs, the war in Ukraine, all on the agenda. We'll bring you the details.
Hello, welcome to the programme. The travel ban is back. President Trump has signed an executive order that will ban citizens of 12 countries from entering the United States by next week. The list includes Afghanistan, Somalia, Haiti and Iran. The order said the administration will protect the United States from foreign terrorists and those perceived to be a threat to public safety. In addition to the 12 under a total ban, there are 7 other countries whose nationals face partial travel restrictions. They include Cuba and Venezuela. The president claimed it was a response to the recent firebombing attack in Boulder, Colorado, that injured 12 people. But Egypt is not on this list, despite the fact the man in custody was an Egyptian national. Congressman Clay Higgins of Louisiana sits on the Homeland Security Committee. During the election campaign, he endorsed Donald Trump's spurious claim that Haitian immigrants were eating dogs. He's welcomed a return to the travel ban. Here's what he told BBC Radio a little earlier.
The world must remember that traveling to the United States is a privilege, not a right. And the American people largely have had enough of immigrants coming to our country and violating our laws and committing violence upon our people.
One of the nations impacted by the partial travel ban is Venezuela. Here was the reaction of their interior minister, who was speaking on state media.
Estados Unidos acaba de sacar algo.
The United States has just issued something prohibiting the entry of any Venezuelan into the country.
No, ni con
Not
visa.
even with a visa. It's prohibited. In truth, being in the United States is a great risk for anyone.
En verdad,
Not just Venezuelans. If you are a fool, then go to the United States.
But what about this decision to leave Egypt off the list? Greg Swenson is chairman of Republicans Overseas, UK.
I think it's a little confusing, and you could argue that, the president has been, as Jake pointed out, very specific on selecting the countries that either have terrorist activity or, weak or hostile governments, high visa overstay rates, or just lack proper vetting. And so, I think, this proves that it's a common sense policy. It's not just a blanket ban because he doesn't, particularly trust a certain country. So, I think I was surprised that Egypt wasn't on it, but I think it just demonstrates that the president is being very specific and using common sense.
Our colleague Sumi Somaskanda will be with us throughout the afternoon from the White House. She's principally there for the visit of German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. But no question, Sumi, about where most of the focus is ahead of that visit. It's the travel ban. Same principle as back in 2017, but some differences in this travel ban.
That's right, Christian, and you can get the sense that you have a similar reaction to the travel ban that was introduced in 2017. Confusion and many questions being asked. Why were the countries that were selected for this travel ban selected? Why were others left off the list? You mentioned Egypt, the president referring to the man from Boulder in that attack there who's an Egyptian national. Why was Egypt not listed here with this travel ban? But our correspondent, our chief North America correspondent, Gary O'Donoghue, has been following all of the back and forth on this for us this morning. And I wanted to bring him in because he's been looking at some of the reactions here as well. Gary, what is your sense of how people are waking up to this travel ban? The first travel ban in 2017, there were protests at airports, massive legal challenges, which we can expect. What about now?
Well, they've done it in a much more organised way, that's for sure, because if you remember last time, there were people on planes in the air who were subject to that ban. And as you say, there was chaos at airports. This time they've thought about it a bit more carefully, but the messaging is very confused. You mentioned the issue about the suspect in Boulder, Colorado being an Egyptian and Egypt not being listed, but also, there are 2 countries on the US list of sponsors of terrorism that aren't on these lists. And terrorism and national security is meant to be one of the reasons for these lists coming in. Now, eventually, of course, last time around, Donald Trump got the Supreme Court to agree to a version of that travel ban, third time of asking. By that time, a lot of the sort of political dividend that he would hope to reap from it had sort of dissipated, if you like. I think this time they're going to anticipate court challenges, because there are court challenges to everything nowadays, but they're hoping that they've done it in a bit more organised way so they can get it in place quicker.
What about the timing of this?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it's sort of capitalising or trying to capitalise a bit on what's happened in the last few days, not just in Boulder, but of course that attack here on Jewish people here in DC as well. I think this is a feeling that this is what the base would quite like to see. And there's a kind of mixture of reasoning. It's not just national security. They're also saying things like, well, these are countries that won't take people back when we try to deport them. These are people who typically overstay their visas. So there's a real kind of hodgepodge of reasoning, but I think it's something that's designed to try and get through the court system as quickly as possible. And I think this is incredibly popular with Donald Trump's whole messaging on immigration and closing the borders and improving national security. It looks like strength.
All right. Our Chief North America correspondent, Gary, thank you so much for that update, Gary. And Christian, as we heard from Gary, there are very likely, of course, to be legal challenges to this, but it is important to look at this travel ban within the prism of a larger immigration crackdown that we're seeing from this Trump administration. We mentioned as well that the Trump administration going after foreign students at Harvard University, a crackdown of deportations in communities across the country, ending asylum for those coming across the southern border. So they see this as part of a larger program to deliver on what Donald Trump said was his promise on the campaign trail to limit immigration significantly to this country.
Sumi, from the background noise, I can tell it's a busy day there at the White House. We will come back to you as soon as the German Chancellor arrives in an hour's time. Not to be missed. Thank you very much for the moment. Let's turn to issues in the Middle East. Israel has recovered the bodies of 2 hostages that were being held in Gaza. Judy Weinstein Haggai and her husband Gadi Haggai, both in their 70s and both American-Israeli passport holders, were murdered during the attack on October 7th by gunmen from the Mujahideen Brigade. It's a smaller militant group operating in Gaza. Their bodies were taken across the border that day. Their deaths confirmed by the Israeli government 2 months later. The couple were last seen on the day of the attack walking near the gates of their kibbutz near Oz, where they were murdered. Let's go to our correspondent in Jerusalem, Seb Usher, who's been following this for us. What do we know about the recovery operation, Seb?
Well, we're hearing that it was a combined operation of the Israeli army and Shin Bet, the internal intelligence agency. Israeli media saying that Shin Bet did an interrogation of a Palestinian militant that they'd captured, and he gave them the information that led to the raid last night in Han Yunis in the south of Gaza, where the 2 bodies were discovered. of course, it's a sad day for people in Israel, but it was one that was a long time coming. It was known, as you said, that they had both been killed on October the 7th. The family has welcomed the fact that they now have a resolution about that's echoed by the Israeli President Isaac Herzog, who said that it's a moment of deep pain, but also a resolution of uncertainty. I think for the Israeli government, it is a partial vindication of their strategy of continuing the offensive in Gaza against Hamas and against the other armed groups there, saying, you know, this is the way that we were able to get our people out from there, whether they're alive or dead.
We're going to turn very shortly to the aid operation in Gaza, Seb. Some news from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, this Israeli US-backed organisation, that they've resumed some of their operations. What can you tell us?
Yes, they have. I mean, they have 4 distribution sites. 2 of those were open not early in the morning as they had been opened in the first week of its operation, and where we saw 3 days in which tens of thousands of Palestinians who were queuing up to try and get their aid, desperately seeking food, were killed or wounded in still disputed circumstances, with the eyewitnesses saying that they were fired on by Israeli troops, the Israeli army saying that it didn't fire on Sunday when there was the first incident, but did acknowledge that on Tuesday morning they did, but saying that it was against a few suspects who'd come towards them in a threatening manner. So this has happened, this reopening of 2 sites in Rafah again in the south of Gaza. It seems without incident, only for an hour or so. I think it opened about 2:15 local time here and closed about an hour later. 2 other sites in the centre of Gaza and also in Han Yunis, they weren't open. So we'll have to see in the coming days if all 4 sites are going to be opened and if the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is up and fully operational again.
So, Asha, thank you very much for that. Let's bring in then Tess Ingram. She's a spokesperson for the UN's Children Fund, UNICEF. She has been looking at the issues regarding humanitarian principles in Gaza. This is what she had to say a little earlier.
We're not working with this foundation, but we are continuing to deliver what little aid we are able to get in through the Kerem Shalom crossing, and of course providing services for children where we can, including mental health support. So our work is ongoing, but we have been very clear about 2 things. And the first one is that this blockade must be lifted. It is still being implemented. You know, this drip, drip, drip of trucks is not acceptable. It is not anywhere near the amount of aid that's needed. And so that's the first thing, is we really need to see trucks come in at scale and be able to be distributed to people wherever they are in Gaza. And we've also been very clear that this so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is not something that we're cooperating with because it does not meet our humanitarian principles.
Let's bring in Georgia Tacey. She is the response director in Gaza for Save the Children. She's currently in Deir al-Balah. Thank you for being with us. It is a complex, complicated war zone because Hamas is embedded within the civilian population. Do you believe there is any method to distribute aid that directly involves the Israelis in or near that aid distribution?
No, I think Save the Children and the rest of the INGO and UN community have been very clear that a controlling power should not be involved in the distribution of any kind of aid, especially in a population that has been terrorised for over 18 months with constant bombardment from the authorities. And so there is also no need for us to be relying on just one small, arguably inexperienced agency that has reduced the 400 sites of distribution that we were using several months ago to only 4. It's a false choice to say that it's either no aid or going through this mechanism, because we all know that we have thousands of trucks outside the border filled with all the food and medical supplies we need. It's a political choice that those supplies have not been allowed to be let in.
The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, we'll refer to them as the GHF, say they've distributed so far 7 million meals that they brought into the Gaza Strip. We've heard from moderate Israeli voices today, and it seems to me across the political spectrum, they think this is working. What would you point to as evidence that it's not?
Well, the fact that prior to the aid blockade, we were servicing over 2 million people across 400 sites. So the fact that they are distributing some food is still just a drop in the ocean. And that is the only type of aid that's being permitted through this agency, and arguably for the rest of us also, that there is 2 million people that need medical care, that need sanitation, that need disease control, that need shelter, that need hygiene kits, that need education, that need all the aid that we are expected to deliver as part of upholding humanitarian law in conflict zones. And so I think just being able to provide one small box of food to a very small amount of population, making them move for hours on foot to get there, instead of what we're used to doing, like Save the Children, at the same time as these GHF distributions are running water distributions. And we don't need Apache helicopters, we don't need armed guards, we don't need soldiers, because we work with the community, we work with community leaders, we have trust, we know how to do small distributions that are safe, and people are lining up perfectly politely, speaking with their neighbour next to them, taking their water and moving only 20 metres back to their shelter, not having to walk for 3 hours with a box on their head with only one type of food or aid. So it's just not good enough, and it's completely unnecessary.
You've pinpointed so many interesting areas: water distribution, education for children, which is absolutely key, and also, of course, the inoculation clinics that I know Save the Children runs in many war zones around the world. How does the GHF ensure, as far as you're aware, that every family gets aid, every child gets aid? How do they ensure that the weakest in society get access to what they need?
Well, they don't, and they can't. And we haven't seen any evidence of what they have established and how that could possibly meet the most vulnerable. We know that now Gaza has the terrible award of having the most amount of child amputees in the world. And there's so many war-related injuries. There's women, there's children, there's the elderly that cannot move from their shelters because they have been injured through the war or already had some type of disability. There's no way they can be on foot for 3 hours, lining up in the heat, putting themselves at risk of being killed, as we've seen over 100 people have been killed over the last week at these distribution sites, just to collect what we were all delivering several months ago without any of this chaos, and certainly without this loss of life.
It's been difficult to verify the number of lives lost in this GHF operation, and all the more difficult because we're not given access, and Israel does not want us to see the things that they're doing in Gaza. But how much access are your staff getting on the ground, and what are the risks involved in that?
Well, we're able to still provide services. I mean, our warehouses are empty now, but we are able to run our health clinics. We are allowed to reach at least 10 shelters a week in terms of running child protection programs and nutrition screening and things like that. But our staff are risking their life every day coming to the office and then going out to these shelters. We received a text message from one of our colleagues yesterday who apologised that she couldn't come into work because there was a quadcopter, a drone, that was shooting people in her camp and had shot one of her neighbours. And we were like, absolutely, of course you shouldn't come to work. Please look after yourself. By the end of the day, she called to say that one of her family members had been shot by that quadcopter, and she was en route to a hospital that she knew was very unlikely that they had the medical supplies to treat a woman that had a bullet wound going through her shoulder and out her back.
Georgia Tacey, thank you for coming on the programme.
Sure.
Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Welcome back. The German leader Friedrich Merz will hold his first face-to-face meeting with US President Donald Trump in the coming hours. High on the agenda will be the conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East, but the two leaders will also be discussing trade, with Germany's economy likely to take a big hit from the recently announced US tariffs. The US remains Germany's biggest trading partner. So the Trump administration's 25% tariff on all vehicles entering the country is likely to impact the German car makers extremely hard. In the past, the US leader has called the Germans very bad as he bemoaned the millions of cars they sell to the United States. Trump's threat of a 50% tariff on all European goods is also still looming for July, unless a deal with Brussels is struck in the interim. Let's speak again to our colleague Sumi Samaskanda, who is at the White House for us this afternoon. These encounters, Sumi, in the Oval Office, they're always fraught with danger. We saw that with President Zelensky and President Ramaphosa. But you have here two men whose politics and interests outside politics are in fact not that far apart.
Yeah, and so much, Christian, will really be focusing on if these two men get along, how they get along. I will say, just on your point of these meetings in the Oval Office that have become somewhat fraught, we understand that Chancellor Merz spoke not only to other European leaders who have been here to the White House for these meetings in the Oval Office with Donald Trump, of course his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron, but he also spoke with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. It gives you a sense of how he is preparing for this trip. But again, to your point, Christian, these are two men that perhaps do have some points of common understanding. You know, Chancellor Merz is someone who is a social conservative. He is someone who worked for BlackRock for years and had a very close relationship with the U.S. He traveled to the U.S. often. And in fact, Chancellor Merz was recently asked on a local German broadcaster at an event that they were hosting about the phone calls that he's had with Donald Trump. And he said, you know, they were friendly phone calls, that they've established something of a relationship, a baseline relationship. Much has been made about the fact that they now address each other by their first names. Chancellor Merz now has Donald Trump's cell phone number, which all of these small things add towards how the Germans and the Chancellor have been preparing for this meeting. You do see that on some social issues in particular and on immigration, these two men are aligned. Of course, Chancellor Merz has been trying to crack down on immigration at home in Germany, and we know, as we were talking earlier in the program, Christian, that we're seeing that here as well in the U.S. But let's get a bit more perspective now on what will be on the table today for these two leaders. We have Dr. Liana Fix with us. She's a fellow for Europe at the Council on Foreign Relations and is joining us. Liana, very good to have you with us again on BBC News. We were talking a bit about the relationship between Friedrich Merz and Donald Trump and what some of the pitfalls might be for this meeting. What do you expect to see?
Well, the relationship aspect is obviously very important, but there are also policy issues that are not so easily just to smooth over by a good relationship. On the defense side, Germany has something to account for. It can theoretically raise defense spending and spend more on defense, as Donald Trump has demanded, 5% of GDP, because it has changed its debt brake. But on the trade deficit, Germany is, together with Mexico, China, and Vietnam, one of the 4 countries with the biggest trade deficit with the United States, something which has been the trigger for Donald Trump's unprecedented tariffs. So while negotiations on tariffs are going on with the European Union, Germany has a special place with regards to its unfortunate trade deficit with the United States from Donald Trump's perspective.
Liana, this is a difficult line to walk on, these policy issues, isn't it, for Chancellor Merz to stand his ground on trade and tariffs? We know negotiations are happening with the EU, but also to develop some sort of good working relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And then he speaks not only for Germany, but he also speaks for Europe, both on the trade and the tariff question. He obviously will try to help through a good relationship to make negotiations for Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission president, easier. But then he's also part of the group of 4, the UK, France, Germany, and Poland, who see themselves in a leadership role on Ukraine. So that is definitely a topic that Friedrich Merz will not be able to avoid, and to try to steer Trump into a direction of not abandoning Ukraine support.
And what do you think we'll see the Chancellor say? Any promises on defense spending? We know that this really has been an issue that President Trump has raised several times. He wants to see 5% GDP spending by NATO countries.
So the German defense minister has actually said beforehand, and the new foreign minister, that Germany would be willing to commit to 5%. These 5%, as was seen by the NATO Secretary General, are divided into two parts: 3.5% for hard defense spending, and 1.5% for everything, dual-use goods, military infrastructure, bridges, and so on. So that's the idea how NATO European member allies want to get to 5%. Germany is on board with that plan.
Liana, just quickly before we let you go, how well prepared do you think the Chancellor is for this meeting?
He is extremely well prepared. He will have taken a lot of time studying Donald Trump, studying these meetings. But it's also, in that moment, it's also a question of intuition. And one thing that brings Donald Trump and Friedrich Merz together is their dislike for Angela Merkel. So perhaps that's one thing that they can certainly agree upon.
Yeah, that is a very good point. All right, Liana Fix, always good to have you on BBC News. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Christian, as we hand back to you, interesting to note that we understand that the Chancellor has brought 2 gifts for Donald Trump. We know that this has become part of the process of meeting with the President in the Oval Office. Not entirely sure what those are yet, but we'll be following that closely and all the details of this visit here in Washington.
I hope it's a new putter and a driver, Sumi. That will go down well. We'll see what it is when they convene at the White House in the next hour. We're going to take a short break around the world and across the UK. You're watching BBC News. This is BBC News, the headlines. President Trump reissues a travel ban, this time imposing full restrictions on 12 countries, including Afghanistan. The Democrats say it is designed to distract attention from a deeply unpopular spending bill. The aid organisation that controversially replaced UN operations in Gaza has resumed distribution at 2 of its centres that had been closed this past 24 hours. Israel says it has recovered the bodies of 2 of its citizens killed during the Hamas October 7th attack. UK health officials issue a warning over the use of weight loss jabs for women who are pregnant or breastfeeding. Lots of sport around this afternoon, so let's get the latest on that from Sarah Mulkerins.
Thank you very much. Let's start with the news in the last hour. England's women's manager, Sarina Wiegman, she has named her 23-player squad for the defence of their European title in Switzerland next month. Amongst those included is Chelsea's Lauren James, who has not played since April after suffering a hamstring injury in England's 5-0 win over Belgium in the Nations League. Wiegman has also included the Brighton forward Michelle Adjemang in the final squad. The 19-year-old scored on her England debut last year.
Of course, it's always difficult because you have, you can pick 23 and you would like to pick a little more because players have been in the environment that have done well. But at the end, you have to make those decisions, which is for some players, for 23 players, very good, and for some players, disappointing. But yeah, we've had the whole process. We've seen the team, of course, a lot over the last week and the last months. So yeah, it's done now.
At the French Open, it is women's semi-final day where the eagerly anticipated showdown between world number 1 Aryna Sabalenka and defending champion Iga Swiatek is underway. Sabalenka, she flew out of the blocks early in the first set. She went to double break up to lead 3-1, but Swiatek started to find her rhythm, pulled herself back into it, brought it all the way to a tiebreak, which the world number 1 has just wrapped up. So she has taken the first set. They're still in the first game in the second set. And the winner will meet either Coco Gauff or Lois Boisson in the final. They are next on court after this one wraps up. Now, the second of the Men's Nations League semi-finals takes place later on Thursday with European champion Spain taking on France in Stuttgart. The winners of that will face Portugal then in the final on Sunday. France boss Didier Deschamps expects his Paris Saint-Germain players to be ready to play after their Champions League success, with 5 players involved in the French club's 5-0 victory over Inter last Saturday.
They're here, so I'm counting on them. After that, it just depends on how things go. I found them very happy on Monday evening, of course, also a bit tired. From the discussions I've had, even if you never know how the body and head will react, the ideal is when there's a peak like that, you always have to come down. But in this case, you have to get back up quickly.
Rangers have appointed former Southampton boss Russell Martin as their new head coach. The 39-year-old has signed a 3-year deal at Ibrox and will succeed interim boss Barry Ferguson, who took over from Philippe Clement in February. Martin guided the Saints into the Premier League through the playoffs last year, but he was sacked in December and they were relegated. Now, the Edmonton Oilers got the Stanley Cup Finals off to a dramatic start, beating the Florida Panthers 4-3 in overtime to take the lead in the best-of-7 series. The Oilers would have feared a repeat of last year's finals when the Panthers went 3-1 up early in the second period. But Matthias Ekstrom's goal in the third over forced the overtime period, where Leon Draisaitl's second goal of the evening secured victory. Game 2 of the Stanley Cup Finals is also in Edmonton on Friday. And the NBA Finals, they get underway on Thursday with the Oklahoma City Thunder hosting the Indiana Pacers in Game 1. Both sides are looking to finish off their season with a first-ever NBA championship, with the Thunder, who had the best regular season record in the league, going in as favourites.
Staying true to who we are is the reason why we're here, and we'd be doing ourselves a disservice if we changed or tried to be something we're not. Once we got here, we've had success doing so, and if we want to keep having success, we have to be who we are. And it's organic, so it's nothing like we have to think about or force. It just is who we are, no matter the moment.
And just before we go, an update on that tennis in France. Świątek has broken Sabalenka in the first game of that second set, so she's leading 1-0 in that second set, but she is a set down. Sabalenka took that opener on a tie-break, but that is it for me for the moment.
Sarah, thank you very much. I should bring you some news that we're getting in the last few minutes. Reports from the news agencies that at least 3 journalists have been killed in Israel, in Gaza, I beg your pardon, an Israeli strike on a hospital in northern Gaza. A spokesman for the Al-Ahli Arab Baptist Hospital in Gaza City said the 3 journalists were killed in the hospital's compound, along with a father who was in that vicinity at the time. So at least 3 journalists reported to have been killed in an Israeli strike on a hospital, in a hospital complex in northern Gaza. We're going to stay in the Middle East because there is a very interesting poll that has come out, published this week in Haaretz newspaper. It won't come as a surprise to many that attitudes towards Palestinians have hardened since the attacks on October 7th, but the response to some of the questions that were asked in this survey are quite shocking, and they've already stirred plenty of debate inside Israel, with some questioning the manner in which it was done. It's been published by Professor Tamir Sarek of Pennsylvania State University. He questioned 1,000 Israeli Jews, and here are some of the headlines. At least 70% of Jewish Israelis support the expulsion of Palestinians from Gaza. That support increases to almost 100% among ultra-Orthodox Jews. At least 38% support the expulsion of Arabs from Israel, those who hold Israeli citizenship. Again, that number increases to over 90% within some religious Jewish groups. And when asked whether conquering an enemy city, the IDF should act in similar manner to the way the Israelites acted when Joshua conquered Jericho, in other words, killing everyone in the city, a minimum 37% said yes. Let's speak to Dalia Scheinlin. She's a political consultant, pollster and journalist. She's analysed the poll, but she is not the author. She wrote about it for the newspaper. What sort of response, Dalia, has there been to the results in this survey, and how have people received it?
Well, it's a very good question. I can only tell you about how I have received responses, even though it is not my survey. But many people were reaching out to me, asking me if the survey could possibly be credible, looking to find some sort of methodological flaws in the survey or technical reasons to discredit or disbelieve the results. And frankly, I think it came from a lot of people on the left-wing side of the map who believe in peace, who believe that Israelis and Palestinians can still be brought back to supporting peace, who did not want to believe that that the findings could be as negative as they were with relation to the other side. I have to say that I asked Professor Tamir Sarek for the data. He provided all of the data. I did not see significant methodological flaws. There are always some variations. Few samples are perfect, but the reason why I wasn't surprised by the findings is because they are fairly commensurate, not exactly to the number, but they are fairly commensurate with the more hardline attitudes that we see in Israeli society since the beginning of the war. And I should say that there are also some contradictory trends. I actually don't see them as contradictions, but there are also some more moderate trends, even within the survey that you cited, Professor Tamir Sarek's survey, and in other surveys I've conducted. I think this is not exactly a contradiction because Israelis are responding to a series of unprecedented developments. They are changing their minds, reactive to the situation, definitely feeling hardline and belligerent, but also many of them casting about for ways out. We, for example, consistently see a majority of Israelis who support an end to the war, for hostage release, of course. So all of those things are true. It's just not a simple story, but it is alarming data.
I think you're right to point out that obviously emotions are raw, and there is a reaction still to what happened on October the 7th. But still, some of this is pretty shocking. Outside the secular Jewish society, over 60% think all citizens of a captured enemy city should be killed. I mean, on the face of it, that is the kind of nihilistic attitudes, Dalia, that Israeli governments would argue it is trying to eliminate.
Well, they would argue that, but what we've seen in this conflict, and what I know also from doing public opinion research and looking closely at other conflict societies or post-conflict societies, is that you often have parallel trends in public opinion. We've seen this through the joint Israeli-Palestinian surveys that I've been conducting with my colleagues, my Palestinian colleagues, since I've been involved in them since 2016. The joint research project goes back 25 years, and we do see a lot of what we call a mirror image. Very similar trends. They can be positive trends, but in recent years, they're mostly negative trends. I can give you an example. In the July 2024 Joint Israeli-Palestinian Survey, we found that over 80% of each side, Israelis and Palestinians, thought that what the other side had done justifies everything our side had done. So, over 80% of Palestinians said October 7th was justified because of how much we've suffered in Gaza under Israeli control. Whereas Israelis said, given October 7th, everything we've done in this war is justified. It is a mirror image. Another interesting mirror image is the victimization attitude. Both sides, over 80%, think that they are the exclusive victims. These are very, as you say, deeply alarming trends. They are violent and nihilistic, but they're also not unique to one side of the conflict, nor are they even unique to this conflict. I would argue that being involved in a war dehumanizes people on the other side and makes everybody behave with a little less humanity.
That is absolutely true. The cliche in politics is that you get the government you deserve, the government you vote for. Is this government then a reflection of Israeli society at large? And how do you think these attitudes, which may or may not be there, but do seem, as you say, to be there, are informing policy?
That's a very good question. I mean, this government was legitimately elected. It's also worth noting that if you really want to put a fine point on it, the current coalition only won 48% of the vote just because of how our electoral system works. But that is a fair victory, and this government has a ruling majority. However, since the first days of the establishment of the government in late 2022, it started enacting policies that were so unpopular that the government, the original coalition, has been unable to win a majority in any credible, unbiased survey, to the extent that surveys are unbiased, since early 2023. And it's done even worse during the war. And even at this moment, in all surveys, the current coalition cannot get more than 49 or 52 parliamentary seats out of 120. So very far away from a majority. There is a majority who want the prime minister to resign. And I think it's hard to say this government reflects the public, especially given that we have 60 to 70 or even higher % of Israelis who want to end the war for the sake of getting the hostages back. Having said that, polls do not topple governments. The government is still the legitimately elected government. And I think that ultimately what we see is the government ignoring majority opinion in favor of satisfying the most extreme elements of society, particularly those who voted for it and might still vote for it, which is a minority, but it's not nothing. It's a minority of, let's say, people who are still voting for the current coalition in all surveys represents about over 40% of the population, up to 45%. That's the population this government cares about. They have studiously ignored majority opinion with relation to what to do about the hostages, what to do about the war. The population would have preferred to go into elections by now. And so if the government is honest, no, it is not representing the people. It's going against the majority of the people. But in a political system of supposedly at least an electoral democracy, if not fully liberal democracy anymore, you don't determine policy, and you certainly don't go into elections just based on polls. And so the government is saying, we'll stick it out. We are having a coalition crisis right now. By the time we end this broadcast, the government might collapse, or it might not, and it might last until late 2026.
Something to watch. And if it does, we may well come back to you. Dalia Scheindlin, thank you very much.
Hope so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
An Australian woman accused of murdering 3 of her relatives and attempting to kill a 4th by serving them toxic mushrooms has been accused of foraging for the ingredients to be used in the meal. Erin Patterson denies deliberately poisoning her guests. Our Australia correspondent Katie Watson reports from the court in Victoria.
The prosecution arrived at court early today. Final preparations for a crucial cross-examination in the trial which has gripped Australia. On the stand, Erin Patterson, who defended her actions before that fateful lunch back in 2023 and in the days after. Her in-laws Don and Gail Patterson died within days of eating a beef Wellington, later found to have contained death cap mushrooms. So too did Gail's sister, Heather Wilkinson. Prosecutor Dr. Nanette Rogers began by quizzing Erin Patterson about a food dehydrator she dumped at this local tip as her relatives were dying, accusing Miss Patterson of wanting to dispose of any evidence that would have revealed she'd dried some death cap mushrooms for that meal. She denied that. The jury was then shown photographs that she'd taken of mushrooms being dried on the dehydrator at home, as well as pictures of mushrooms on a small set of scales. I suggest that you were weighing these death cap mushrooms so that you could calculate the weight required for the administration of a fatal dose for one person. Agree or disagree, said Dr. Rogers. Disagree, Erin Patterson replied. She was also quizzed over why she invited her relatives to her house for that lunch nearly 2 years ago. Earlier in the trial, Ian Wilkinson, the only survivor, told the jury that over the lunch, Erin Patterson had announced to the family that she had ovarian cancer.